and welcome to Series 6, Episode 2 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Lauren North, and of course my co-host is the lovely Leslie Cara with a gorgeous new haircut, which we love. So
Thank
lovely. Last week we chatted to Phoebe Morgan with our first mini-sode episode, our first of 6. We've done all the recordings now, and she was just so generous with her time and knowledge. If you missed it, the first one is on the role of the editor. They're full of amazing advice and information and things like that we didn't know, did we? So it's really handy to listen to. And if you have or haven't listened already to our first in the series of our podcast, it was with Lizzie Barber on sex in thrillers. How much is too much? It was a very popular episode, so I'm sure you have all listened to it already. But our topic today is the next deal: when, where and how. But before we dive into our topic, Leslie, how have you been and what have you been up to?
Well, I've been very well, thank you very much. I was just thinking when you were talking about the minisodes with Phoebe Morgan, because we recorded them all in one go, I've got my horrible old long hair in them and look hideous, but never mind.
So at all.
I feel a lot better now.
Superimpose your head onto all
yes,
of
could you
please, floating head?
Put that into the editing? Yes, that will test your editing skills.
It would indeed.
No, I've been good. Well, I don't know if I've been good, but I've been okay. I've been dog sitting for my brother, so we've had a week looking after Rosie, the Jack Russell, which is always fun. Although she was very naughty and she was off her food. And well, she wasn't off her food, but she was holding out for her liver treats and not eating her regular food. So I know that my sister-in-law Ruth has now changed her diet, so she's back on the dog food now. So anyway, so too many treats are bad for us. You see, that's the thing.
Yes. How's your exhaustion from COVID, post-COVID?
Well, it's getting better, I'm pleased to say. I mean, I still have to pace myself because if I do too much, I start to feel absolutely shattered. But I have noticed just in these last few days that my energy levels are coming back. So
that's good to know.
That is really good because I was quite low and I don't know if that, well, it was all sorts of things, COVID amongst them. So yeah, so that's good. What else have I been doing? Oh, I've been dropping some proofs off at my local bookshop.
Oh, I saw the photos. Yes, it looked very exciting.
Aldborough Books and Southwold Books and Halesworth Books. And I'm going to be dropping some more in London with Alison Barrow in another month. So that's going to be fun. And what else have I been doing apart from getting my hair cut? Yeah, having a bit of a rest, really. I think I needed it. I wasn't being honest with myself about how tired and stressed I was. So I've just, I'm on a bit of a break at the moment. Still doing social media, still doing podcasting, but just having a slightly less pressurized time of it now. So yeah, and I think that's about it. Planning a holiday. Oh, I'm waiting for my next grandson to be born. He's little Milo, he's going to be called, because we know he's a boy, is he's due on the 1st of May. Which is
how exciting.
Next Sunday, or whenever this will come out, it will be Sunday, imminent Sunday. So yeah.
Oh, it's so exciting.
That is very exciting. My daughter-in-law is absolutely massive.
Oh, I bet.
She's at that stage where, you just
very uncomfortable.
Limbo, you just want to give birth.
Yeah.
Well, what about you, Lauren? How have you been coping in these holes?
It's been Easter holidays. It's just been mad. And I don't know how I've done it in the past, because I have normally continued to write around the kids. But for whatever reason, I just haven't this time. And I think it's because I've been in the middle of my book. And it's that middle bit. And it's hard to sort of go any further without really concentrating on what I'm doing, and I don't want to get it wrong. So I haven't done much writing, which has been frustrating, but I did send a pleading email to my romance editor asking if page proofs were available, because I could definitely do that, and they were, so I got to do them instead, which was good. I then got on Saturday the proofs of all the Wicked Games came through the door, which I was really excited to see. So that was very exciting.
Still waiting for mine. Hope it arrives soon.
Yes, they haven't been posted out to other authors yet. It's just the author gets this week. I think they all go to authors next week, which is exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing it out in the world. Yes, and other than that, I'm just trying to get back to writing, hopefully, once the kids go back this week. I want to finish the book that I'm currently writing by the end of May. And the first part is going to the publisher, hopefully the next month or so, to see if they might be interested, because I'm actually out of contract after all the Wicked Games. So that's quite exciting and nerve-wracking time for me, and brings us very nicely onto our topic, which is the next deal: when, where, and how.
Yes, that's a fantastic segue, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, because that's always interesting, isn't it? Because the process differs from one author to another, and from one agent and one publisher to another. Because you can, some like you're saying, you can write a whole book and submit it for consideration, or what sometimes happens is you submit a partial, don't you? I mean, that's how I usually do it. When I'm coming to the end of a 2-book deal, when the book is the second of those books is delivered, usually Amanda and I meet and have a little chat about what ideas I've got, and I might say something like, oh, I want to write a cookery book for dogs. I don't actually, but anyway. And she'll say, oh, lovely, but can we make it kind of a thriller? That kind of thing. And then we sort of, bandy some ideas about and then submit a partial normally. So that's how I've worked in the past. But there's advantages and disadvantages, aren't there? Both.
Yeah, there are. And it's funny, it's not something that's talked about, which is why we're actually doing this podcast on it, isn't it? Because you sort of talk a lot about getting that first deal and being out on submission, but at what point do you then think about the next deal? Because it does come around so quick, doesn't it? And I've done it both ways. I have done it with a partial and with a full book, and I think I probably prefer to have a full book going to a publisher, just because I think for me the start can change and the characters can change so much between the start and the end that if they only see the start, I might have changed it so much. But it just does depend, I think, because if you want to sort of stay with your current publisher and you're happy with them, then it's quite a good idea for them to see the start and sort of get an idea about whether they're interested.
Yes.
But if you are looking to shop around, then you obviously need a full book. So yeah, there are pros and cons, aren't there?
Yeah, I suppose it does put a bit of pressure on you, because if, like for example, if I only show a partial, then it puts the pressure on you, because you've got to then come up with that whole book and hope that they like it. Because I am hopeless at writing synopses. I really am. So I'm quite glad that I haven't had to do that yet, to submit a
Oh, you're so lucky. I always write one actually, and normally, but they seem to get longer with every time I write one. Like, I don't know how, like, you see all these authors submitting to agents with a 1-page synopsis. Mine are now like 8 pages long.
I know. I think they're the most difficult things in the world to write, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They really are. Especially when you haven't written the book. I mean, it's hard when you've written the book trying to cram 90,000 words into 1 page, but when you don't actually know what's going to happen at the end, I'm always like, this will be a very exciting scene. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yes, indeed. But our guest coming on today is going to be talking to us about her new book, and also the next deal and how it works for her. And so we're very pleased to welcome Harriet Tyce. Welcome, Harriet Tyce, to In Suspense. We are delighted to have you with us today. And first of all, I'm going to read out your formal bio, and then we're going to start having a lovely chat about your forthcoming book, It Ends at Midnight. Okay, so Harriet Tyce grew up in Edinburgh and studied English at Oxford University before doing a law conversion course at City University and practising as a criminal barrister in London for nearly a decade. Since then, she has completed an MA in creative writing, crime fiction at the University of East Anglia. Her debut novel, Blood Orange, published in 2019 to huge critical acclaim and was followed by The Lies You Told in 2020. It Ends at Midnight is her much anticipated third novel, and it's a great one. But before we start talking about that, Harriet, can you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about It Ends at Midnight and what the premise is?
I certainly can, and thank you very much for inviting me on. And I should just say to everyone listening, I'm going to lean back a minute, and so you can see the absolute rotters who are going to be, I think, Zoom bombing throughout this whole conversation. So I'm very sorry. Yes, so it ends at midnight, opens, it opens with the end. It opens with a body or bodies that are impaled on railings outside a house, an exclusive addressed house in Edinburgh after a New Year's party, which has gone horribly wrong. And really what the book is about is the story that has led up to this tragedy that finally unfolds. It's the story of a friendship between two women, Tess and Sylvie, who meet first at school in sixth form in Edinburgh in the late 80s, early 90s. And it deals with that timeline, and then with the developing timeline as they are now in their late 30s, 40s, facing up to life as it becomes much harder, with a diagnosis of a serious illness for Tess, and what that has meant for her as she faces intimations of mortality is that she wants to go back in time to put right something that happened when they were friends as teenagers, which sets off a series of events which really are very difficult for Sylvie, her friend, to cope with. And that's really it in a nutshell. I think you may disagree. It's always so hard to summarize your own book, and you think I'd get better at it, but you know.
That was a great explanation about it, and I really enjoyed it, and I just found like the tension of it was almost like a ticking time bomb, from actually not even just the first page but the title, which I just love. You just immediately get a sense that everything is mounting up to this time, and I wondered if you could talk us through where the idea came from, because you've mentioned Sylvie and Tess. Did they start it off, or was it this concept of New Year's Eve in Edinburgh that sort of was the basis that the idea grew from?
I have to say, there are a number of different points that came together for the inspiration. I mean, the first is really it's quite a sad thing that, I mean, my best friend from school died last year from cancer.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And she was diagnosed with cancer. Well, it would be 3.5 years ago now. And of course, you know, during lockdown in particular, after she received her terminal diagnosis, it's, you know, that kind of thing does make you think. And because I am an evil crime writer, I take things which, you know, happen in my own life and I turn them into something, you know, sometimes absolutely horrific, which I have to say, I think this book is, you know, that was the what if you behave badly. And also the what if was, you know, in our case, Sarah certainly didn't start saying, oh, that terrible thing that we did back then. But, you know, if there had been a terrible thing that we'd done, I can quite see that it would have been a time to come to that reckoning. And so, you know, it really did start. So I used a lot of the settings from my youth, and I used even some of the circumstances, you know, the beach party that happens at which there's a pivotal event. I went to a beach party in sixth form, which was a drunken, slightly raucous affair. And I think that the feeling I always had from that was that, you know, nothing did go out of control. But, you know, again, what if something had? And so those were the sort of, and I guess the characters then, you know, if you have two people, again, decades long friendship, the dynamic within that, you know, there are always going to be jealousies. The grass will always be greener because one person will have achieved one thing, you know, the other. In this case, you know, Sylvie has got the successful career, but hasn't got the husband family that might be some people's ambitions. And Tess doesn't have the career, but does have the husband and does have the more kind of moneyed, privileged existence. You know, both of them have good reason to be happy, but both of them also have actually some reason to be dissatisfied. And so I think that thinking about friendship, and of course, you know, I had to go through quite a lot of reckoning just because, you know, you start to confront ideas of death yourself. that was a good starting point there. And then I have to say that I sometimes, as with in Blood Orange, I just got this image of the ending. I got the image of that death with the orange in the mouth. And that stayed with me very firmly, even though I had no idea to whom it was going to happen or how. I just knew that it would be a really good way to kill someone. And I just had this idea of the railings came into my head and falling off a roof. I think it may have been because we'd stayed in an Airbnb. And these things are not terribly well secured. You can get up onto the roof. And if you're drunk and you decide that you want to go and look at fireworks, actually, it's all scarily plausible that you could. In terms of the book itself, I have to admit that I think I've probably stretched physics way beyond what it actually does, because in fact, most houses in Edinburgh, if there are spikes at the front, they're set sufficiently far enough forward that the weight, you'd have to sort of fall at a jump in order to hit the railings, rather than just, if you go straight down, the drop would kill you, but I don't think there'd be an impalement. But who's arguing with that kind of detail?
Poetic license, I think.
Yeah. Physics, who cares? But that was the second thing, was I thought that would be a good way for someone to die. And thirdly, New Year in Edinburgh is one of the biggest Hogmanay celebrations that there is in the world. And, it's one of the big celebrations that, of course, during lockdown was the idea that it didn't happen is just so extraordinary, as so many of the things that didn't happen. But looking at that, the idea that we're all just sort of stuck in our houses, not even able to watch it on telly, that it's so that again was, I'd say, the third part of the third part of the structure that then wound its way somehow into being a semi-coherent book.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I mean, I love the mystery that you set up at the start. Not only, how these two characters came to be impaled on the railings, but who are they, and that's what you've got to read to find out. And I love books like that. Now, Harriet, all three of your books are centred around the legal profession. And as we heard in your bio, you were a criminal barrister yourself for almost a decade, weren't you? So what is it, do you think, about the legal profession that makes it such fertile ground for thrillers?
It's an interesting question, because for a long time I thought the answer was, well, not much, because it was a job I did, and it was interesting, but it was a lot of, I was schlepping around the southeast, from magistrate court to magistrate's court with a wheelie bag, living on fumes, Stella Artois and fags, and it was it was a stressful and edgy, but not something I necessarily had thought would turn into a story. Though, of course, and I don't know if you remember watching This Life.
Yes.
Yeah. So you see, This Life was started at the time that I started pupillage, and so I did identify somewhat with Anna, as you can kind of imagine, with the leopard print and the fags and all of that. And so I suppose that had given me a slight view that it would be something people might be interested in. It was when I read the acknowledgements to Apple Tree Yard, though, Louise Doughty's book, which is so good, it's just brilliant. And in the acknowledgements, she thanks a barrister with whom she'd spent, I think that she'd watched a trial in the Old Bailey that had gone on for possibly a month, or else she'd just been with the barrister for a good sort of 4-6 weeks in order to get her research in. And I thought, what, I've got all this research in the bag. I've spent all these years doing it. It's ridiculous not to use it. And the fact that it did just suddenly give me this moment of realization that, trials aren't filmed. There isn't insight into the world of barristers, perhaps in the way that there might be for doctors or teachers, and while it did seem quite mundane to me, it began to dawn on me that perhaps there is a veil across this, and that if you were to, pull back the veil, people might be interested in seeing it. And I mean, the other thing I think is that if you've not done the job, it looks quite glamorous, and it looks quite, it looks quite interesting, because all you have ever seen in dramatizations that take out the boring bits and just keep it when it's the peaks of the climaxes of cases, or the really exciting stuff, not just stolen bus tickets or what have you. And then actually I remembered something a former mentor said to me years ago, which is that people are fascinated in other people's jobs. And I actually think that that's completely true. It doesn't really matter what the job is if you speak about it with authority. And so really, it wasn't so much for certainty that it would be of interest, but it was a kind of speculative punt, because I knew that I was bringing in the kind of warts and all barrister appearance. I wasn't going to be, it wasn't a hagiography. It wasn't like this is the most extraordinary gravitas ridden. Actually, many people are, but there's also a load of alcoholics who behave really quite badly. Let's look at some of that. And so I've sort of ended up, there is, and because there is, I'm not going to say an aspect of autobiography in my work, but I certainly take, things or ideas or experiences I've had and then spin them into something. They're generally a starting off point. And I actually think I'm not terribly imaginative, because I couldn't think myself out of a character that's quite similar to me in certain respects. You're looking interested, Leslie.
Yeah, no, I was going to, that sort of brings me on to my next question. I was going to ask whether you want to continue to write about characters working in the profession, and whether that's something that's now associated with the Harriet Tyce brand, if you like, and how you feel about that. But you sort of kind of started to talk about that.
Well, I think that's it. For a start, it's an interesting, it would be interesting to see if I could, and perhaps that's a challenge that I should set myself, just to see what I can do. But I'm chary of appropriation, largely because I don't think I could do it well. I really don't, unless I can actually bring aspects of my own lived experience to the characters. I don't think I can bring that authenticity, because for me, I think that for me, with the kind of writing I do, I really do try and have a level of viscerality and a level of emotional intensity. And I don't think I can achieve that without it being something that's, I always bang on at this point about the Stanislavski method of acting, which I know, but if with that, you don't have to have experienced the death of your husband. You can think about the death of your cat and then spin it. It's all about sort of candy floss seeing it out into this great big noir mess, or at least that's how I see what I do. The law thing is problematic, because I have now reached the limits of my knowledge. I only did it for 10 years, which is both a long and a very short time. My practice didn't become particularly senior. Things have changed so much in the 17-18 years since I left the bar. In terms, they have changed and they have not changed. The bad stuff, I think, remains the same in terms of fees, the overstretching, the lack of resourcing. And in fact, I'd say that's got significantly worse. But there are still aspects of digitization which I can't even begin to speak about. I don't know how it works. And I'm hitting a wall on that. So it's without having to do a huge amount of research, I will struggle to keep it relevant, and I will struggle to keep it working. But having said that, I do feel that it's still something that I have a bit more to say about if I come at it from different angles. And what I am trying to do for the next book is, I do think there will be aspects of a case, of a conviction, but there won't be a barrister or advocate character. There's not going to be a legal specialist. I actually want it to be, someone who is, because I thought this would actually be quite a clever device, someone who's as clueless as me. And so they're asking questions, which of course, if someone's supposedly an expert, would make them look really inauthentic as a character. But if there's someone who's trying to find something out, it would be perfectly reasonable for asking those questions, and therefore I can present the information hopefully in a not too expositional manner, but there will be a kind of naturalistic flow to it, if that
Yes.
makes sense in my head anyway. Gonna have to see if it works. I haven't tried it yet. But in terms of brand, it's interesting actually, because I just had a discussion with my editor about book 4, and I think we'll be touching on this later, I think, in the discussion. But the I just watched A Few Good Men, which is the first time I've seen it. And I suddenly thought, oh, so that's what a legal drama really is, the start to finish of the cuss and thrust in court. And I thought, oh, shall I do this? And I wrote to Jack and said, shall I do this? Because I could do this. And he said, I'm not sure. And his view of my readership and what they like is that it's a 70% psychological thriller, 30% legal mix. And I thought that actually seemed to be a really good point, that it's got bits of it, but it isn't and I think that's quite a liberating way of looking at it, because that 70% allows for an absolutely huge amount of characterization and story development that has absolutely nothing to do with the courtroom or any kind of procedural stuff, which, interesting to a point. If you have too much of it, it can actually get quite dry. And I think there will come a point when, as I say, I am exhausting it. I think I've found a mechanism that I'm going to find interesting to write about, which I think will be fun for the next one. And that means there will be a bit of law. But it can only work if it works. If you try and if you shoehorn it in, of course, no one's going to be convinced by that. And then it looks as if you're just painting by numbers and writing by numbers. And, we all know what happens if we try and do that. It's not a success.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly know what you mean, because with my first 3 books, I had anxious mums of varying different storylines, but they were all anxious mothers and problems with their children. And I think I got to a point when I was writing Safe at Home, and I just felt like I was writing a similar character again. And you do at some point have to really think, okay, I need to change things up a bit now. Otherwise it does just feel too samey, I think. And to write it, let alone what the readers think, you don't want to write the same thing over again. So
if you're bored,
completely understand.
If you're bored, they're going to be bored. It's 100%
certainly true. Yes. But still talking about characterization, and one of our mini-sodes episodes with Phoebe Morgan was on likability and unlikability of characters. And I think it's fair to say that with your characters, you do warm to them initially, and then you start to get this sort of quite unsettled feeling about them. So I wondered, what is your take on characters needing to be likable?
Well, I have to be honest. When I wrote Blood Orange, I didn't think that Alison was a dislikable character in the slightest. I just thought she was a person who was complex, and that was all I was thinking. And when I started to read the reviews, which obviously I don't do anymore because that's not good for you, but when I started to read the reviews and everyone was saying how much they hated her, it came as a complete and utter shock to me, because I just had no idea that I knew she was behaving badly, but it hadn't occurred to me that she was dislikable, because I suppose I'm friends with lots of people who do stuff, some stuff which is good and some stuff which as we all do. So I think that it's it wasn't intentional. It's never been intentional. I mean, I'm aware that there are things to do with the characters where they certainly, I write about middle class sort of dramas, and they are people who are privileged, and that in itself can be a dislikable attribute, certainly. And they are people who behave badly. I am interested to see if it's possible for me to write someone who's truly nice, and that's sort of 100% nice. But then I sort of think that actually people who are truly nice aren't terribly interesting. You need to have a bit of grit in order to generate the tension. And I sort of also wonder that maybe it's something that readers almost quite like, because they are able to settle, they sit on their sofa of an evening, nice and comfy, wrapped up in, a blanket with a cup of tea, and also wrapped up with a lovely sense of moral superiority. And well, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't behave like that. And that's actually quite reassuring, isn't it? Because, you know, if you've got some doubts about, you know, do I parent okay? Is it all right that I go out? Do I, you know, should I have had that glass of wine there? Then at least you can think, well, I'm not that bad. I haven't done that. And that, you know, people do love an outrage. And what's safer than to be outraged by a character in a book who doesn't actually exist, you know? So I think what's really important, though, is to have a character that people can root for to an extent. And I do worry with Midnight sometimes that there is no one that you can really, you know, do you root for them? What is it you're rooting for? And then I thought, well, actually, this is a tragedy. It is a tragedy, this book. And so it's a slightly different thing. It's a slightly different kettle of fish. But I have been thinking very much about, you know, it's sort of thinking about Chris Whitaker's We Begin at the End, you know, where everyone loves Duchess. And, you know, you just love Duchess and you really do love Duchess and you want things to be all right. I'd really like to write a character like that once. I don't know how to. I have no idea how I do it. And even if I tried to, I think they'd obviously, you know, they just automatically end up being appalling. But it would be worth a try. But I don't think overall, though, that it is. I don't think readers are telling the truth when they say they need to like people. They don't mean that. They think they mean that. But what they actually mean is they just need to be interested enough.
Yes.
If you're completely disengaged from them because you actually don't care at all, that's a really bad thing.
Yes.
But being angered by someone and feeling dislike and judgment towards them is still a form of engagement. You know, it's one of the issues we have with Boris, that, you know, Boris engages us however much we prefer, you know, Rees-Mogg, I just, you know, you could wipe him off the face of the earth and it'd be absolutely fine. But, you know, Boris, there is regrettably still sufficient charisma that he's kind of under your skin in a really negative way. I mean, I don't know if I'm meant to go off into politics.
No, that's right, but I think you're right. You know, characters have got to sort of resonate in some way. And even if we hate them or disapprove of them, as you say, we're engaging with them, we're relating to them on some level, aren't we? And getting into the book enough to form an opinion.
Yes. Yes, yeah, and that's that, because then you're reading it to see, you know, you're reading it because you want to see them get their just desserts, you know, or it's, you know, you're reading it, yeah, that's it exactly, isn't it? That you're either reading it to see that the loser wins or that the person who's in the winning position loses, and that you're wanting there to be an outcome. And that's, I think, what you're really trying to get. I think I'm trying to do that when I write, is that I just want people to be willing there on to be some outcome, even if it's not what they think it is that they want it to be. And preferably not that, because preferably that's where you pull the rug out from under their feet. And then, you know, and that's when you have your twist. But that's a sort of slightly separate. But, you know, if every book were full of lovely characters, then, you know, we'd all be writing, you know, sort of, well, actually, even they have unlikable characters that turn out to be likable. But we'd be writing stories for 3-year-olds. You know,
it would be boring. The stories would be boring. Yeah, absolutely.
So with your characters, Harriet, do you do a lot of character analysis beforehand and really get to you just throw them in, do you? And
I do. I've tried doing that in the questionnaires, and it just doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me what it is, the things that they like and dislike, because it sort of reveals themselves. You know, they sort of reveal that kind of thing to me through their actions as they go. I mean, in my second book, I really struggled with the characterization of the protagonist, Sadie. And I realized after I'd done the first draft, it was because I was so keen to make her not Alison from Blood Orange, that all she was not Alison. So, you know, she was like, I shouldn't have another drink. No, I shall put my glass of wine down. And then she did put a glass of wine down, and that was all, you know. And so she was just quite sort of boring. And so I had to give her some personality traits of her own. But in a way, I've never quite felt that she's worked as a person, because she doesn't feel like somebody. Yeah, she's a non-person because she's a non-Alison. Whereas, you know, both Sylvie and Tess kind of presented themselves to me just as, you know, I could see them. I mean, not exactly see them, because I can't really see I'm not very good at sort of physical description, and it's not something. I prefer books where I can imagine what people look like. I've got maybe a tiny framework of, they're dark as opposed to blonde, or they're just a little bit, but not a whole sort of, could be a character, could be a police description for a suspect, but I can, they're sort of fully formed, and then they do things, and that's why, however much I plan, they don't behave, because they do their own thing, because my subconscious knows a lot more about it than my conscious brain does, and so I have to kind of let them grow in that way.
Now, It Ends at Midnight is set in both London and Edinburgh, isn't it? And they're both obviously cities that you know really well. So we were wondering how important setting is to you when you write, and whether it's important for you to be able to sort of picture the streets where your characters are living and working and moving around.
It is, I think, to me very important, because otherwise I can't bring it to life. And I think that if I were simply to, I wouldn't be able to work off map and just make something happen in, say I tried to write something in New York, I just couldn't, unless I actually went and stayed there for a significant period of time. I think that, I think you can kind of tell with books as well, if it's something where someone knows the place and is actually properly familiar. I mean, Trevor Wood's book, The Man on the Street, I don't know if you've read that, but Newcastle, it's there alive, it's a character in the book. Whereas if I set a book in Newcastle, it would, I would effectively be reading off a load of facts that I'd taken from Wikipedia and from Trevor's book. It would be quite obviously for me as a result of research, as opposed to a result of actual sort of fundamental knowing. I mean, again, this is what I mean about lack of imagination, because I know there are people who can bring things to life extraordinarily well, and they've never been to the place ever. Having said that, I do think that the tools of research that are now available have really changed things up, because I've been researching a past in the Highlands for my next book, and I have now actually, I'd been there before, but not for 30 years. And I've been there again since this spring. But in the meantime, I was researching it by using Google Street View and actually literally going along arrow by arrow and doing a 360 look. And it was so familiar, when we then actually drove along that road, and I was like, well, this bit happens there. And my husband's going, how do you know that? And I said, oh, Google Street View. That's what I was doing for all of those days. I was just beetling around on that way. But I think that for setting has to be part of the characterization. Setting is what brings the whole score to life. And if you don't know it intimately, whether by research or by knowledge, it's not going to have the same effect, in my opinion.
And what is it, do you think, about Edinburgh that makes it such a popular location for fiction?
It's beautiful, but it's also, it's Jekyll and Hyde. It's got this the new old town centre, and then it's got this huge surroundings, that you have that amazing sort of Edinburgh Festival, city of literature. It was also the AIDS capital of Europe, with one of the biggest drugs problems. In the 90s, it was extraordinarily bad for heroin use. Scotland's still got the highest, pretty much the highest death rate for drug use in all of Europe. And there are pockets of Scotland where life expectancy is like 40s, 50s, and Edinburgh, for all that it's got this extraordinary external appearance, that's sort of going on underneath. There's a comment I think Glaswegians say about Edinburgh, it's fur coat, no knickers, and that is very much what it is. And so I think that sort of living tension lends itself almost immediately to drama. And and then there is just this extraordinary legacy of work that has come from there, and this body of work that you've got all the Ian Rankin. Rebus is, and I had a lecture from Ian Rankin when I was doing my MA, and he said that he'd chosen a police procedural quite specifically because it's the way that you can get across the greatest strata of class. You know, a police investigation doesn't, you know, every door has to be opened for the police. So you can go from prince to pauper. I mean, even Prince Andrew's, you know, finally getting nobbled. But, you know, you can go from prince to pauper and you can see every respect. And so I think that plays with the juxtaposition, but you can have, you know, so you can have the kind of the middle class drama, you can have Train Spotting, you can have everything in between. It's a really, and it is just stunning. It's got this huge historical, massive historical legacy, which, you know, Robert Louis Stevenson, I mean, I could go on, I will not go on. But but the thing is though, that if you were to ask anybody about why they're, you know, every city, every town, every village has got its history, has got its juxtapositions, has got its parallel lives. It's, you know, that it's not really, you know, Edinburgh is, I think, particularly iconic. But, you know, it doesn't matter where, if you know the place. It goes back to my comments before about setting. If you know the place well enough, and quite honestly, if you love the place well enough. I remember watching a talk where someone said something disparaging about Milton Keynes. You know, it's not like setting in Milton Keynes. And then someone said, but what about this, and came up with, and actually, you know, and the person who'd been disparaging was quite rightfully apologetic, because they'd made some really good points there. It's really more about what you know and what you bring to it for the place than the place itself.
Yeah, that's so true. And you mentioned your MA a minute ago, and one of our questions actually, if you can tell us about that a bit, and like what made you take the plunge between doing your going from law to creative writing?
Sorry, well, I stopped law because I had children, and it wasn't a job I could pursue part-time, which was what I had wanted to do, was to work part-time. And for a period of time, I was just dealing with young kids, which was not really, shall we say, terribly fulfilling, though, you know, obviously had its satisfactions, limited as they might have been. And so I started writing, you know, initially it was just as an outlet. I went to an evening class because, you know, I wanted to be doing something different. And it turned out that I could do it, that I was actually all right at it, and more to the point that I enjoyed it. And so it just sort of built up from there. And I became a bit of a course junkie, just because I wasn't very good at writing into the void. I didn't have the discipline to create deadlines on my own. And I wanted to, you know, essentially it was because of the community. Well, it was twofold. It was to learn how to do things, but also it was to have a community of other people, you know, to whom one was answerable with, you know, yes, I've written this week. That's what's happening. But also, you know, regrettably, what started as a hobby soon became a kind of mildly obsessive ambition that I just became. But I was obsessed with the idea of getting an agent. I hadn't really thought beyond that, because that seemed to be a big enough ambition in and of itself. And so the reason I signed up for the MA was because I had I'd finished a manuscript, which I had sent out to about, I don't know, 30, 40 agents. And I'd had 6 of them had called in the full manuscript, which was, you know, that was brilliant. And the no's were all continually getting better. But I really wasn't sure quite what to do to take the next step, and how to sort of, I knew I needed to improve, because clearly there were many aspects of it that weren't working, but I was also not sure how to do that on my own. I'd been quite reluctant about doing an MA before that time, just because I knew that it would be literary fiction and not crime, and that was making me slightly blood run cold, because I didn't want to do that, and I thought people would be sniffy about crime, just because, you know, it's genre work and it's not Sally Rooney. But then I saw an advertisement for this, and it was perfect, because it was specifically crime fiction, and it was taking it as seriously as it deserves to be taken, and actually giving it a proper academic heft. And so I thought, well, you know, last shot, if this doesn't come off, then, you know, I need to start, you know, there comes a point when you have to stop doing courses and actually try and get a real job. And I was really lucky that this was the final push that I needed, because it was during this that I wrote my dissertation was Blood Orange. And I got a publishing deal before the end of the course, which was, it was kind of the stuff of dreams, I have to say. It was quite extraordinary. But Fantastic. It did come off the back of about 6-7 years of a lot of rejections. So even though it's sort of it's an overnight success sitting on top of a massive iceberg of,
it's always that way though, isn't it? And of course Blood Orange was a Richard and Judy book club pick. It's done phenomenally well. Did you have any idea when you were writing it that you were sort of onto something amazing there? Has it come as a complete shock?
Yeah, total shock. I mean, I thought it was good in the sense that it felt like it was working, and there were bits of it I just thought, I've got it. This is, when you get into the flow and it just sort of comes. From that point of view, I knew that it was as good as I could make it. What I had no idea about was that there was actually going to be an audience for it. And I remember saying to my agent, before she was going to send it out, we'd had a meeting just to discuss the last tweaks I needed to make to the manuscript. And I said to her, do you think people will be interested? Are people going to want to read this? And she just said, oh yes, Harriet, they will. Which, and then you just say, well, she would say that, wouldn't she? How nice that she's got faith. But no, I mean, it's been an extremely surreal experience. And they hadn't told me that they were putting it forward for Richard and Judy, which is good, because I just think because it wouldn't have occurred to me if I hadn't got it. So it was something that was even a possibility. But when my editor was calling me to say that, she emailed me to say she wanted to have a chat, and I thought, fuck, this is because of the next book, isn't it? It's complete. Sorry if I shouldn't have spoken.
No.
But
it's fine.
I was so behind on book 2. It was such a disaster. So when we scheduled in the call, and I spent the first 15 minutes apologizing, and then she finally, I took breath, because I do talk a lot, you might have noticed. And I took breath, and she said, Harriet, I was calling you for a reason, and it's not to do with that. You've got Richard and Judy. And I was like, what the fuck? And then after that, and then she explained that it would have something called a halo effect, which would mean that supermarkets would be more likely to stock it, because, getting into supermarkets, as we know, is not very easy. But I don't think anyone anticipated what happened during 2020, and that it was, I think that it was, it's awful to say that it was, because of lockdown, but it was because of lockdown. I think because there was visibility at the point at which people were desperate for some sort of distraction, because it had been on the Richard and Judy thing, from the January to the March, and then in April it was a Kindle deal, so it was 99p, at which point it went through the roof. It just went completely silly, 500,000 copies, and about half of that was actual paperbacks, was real books, and you're like, that's mental. I still think it's mental, but I think it was an almost artificial peak. I mean, now we have to get to a point of equilibrium, because it was so absurd for a debut. I mean, it's ridiculous. Leslie, you must have moments of this. You've gone through the roof. So, I mean, it's just like...
I know, it's surreal. And when you're going through it, you don't really... You're just your mind's in a whirl, really, isn't it? You just can't quite believe it. I know.
Completely. And I just constantly, from that point onwards, I've just been like, well, I've peaked now. And then you sort of think, and then you're like, oh God, and then you think, well, actually, no, that's looking at it completely the wrong way around, because just how extraordinary to have been lucky enough to have that. It's just, it's amazing. And even if I never achieve those sales again, I did once, and that's mental. And it's absolutely, and I think that was one of the reasons I found writing book 2 so hard, because that just all of that. And now
it's all happening at the same time.
It just, now though, I think I'm just a bit like, well, you can't expect lightning to strike twice.
Well, that brings us nicely onto our topic for today, which actually is all about the next deal. And we've been talking about that earlier before you came on. And, there's always lots of discussion, isn't there, about first deals and, getting an agent and submitting to publishers and securing that, that precious publishing deal, but not so much talk about subsequent deals. And with some people, they do a partial, they come to the end of their 2-book deal and do a partial and submit, or they may write an entire novel and then submit it. We were wondering what it was like for you, because I think It Ends at Midnight is the first book of your second deal, isn't it, with the same publishers? Yes. So how did that second deal come about? In what process did you follow?
The negotiations began around the time of publication of Lies, and I did not have a third book idea other than just very nebulous. I think at that point I was calling it The Terrible Thing because of the terrible thing that had happened in the past. It was very, very nebulous. And my agent opened up the negotiations, and she said, this is because they'd sort of said what's going on, and let's, and I think that there was a feeling that it would be good to have something in place. But it all happened a lot faster than I was given to believe that it might. And I didn't actually have to, I think I might have had to come up with 2 paragraphs just to show that there was a sort of idea. So I think, no, that's right. I was asked if I could put together a couple of paragraphs, and I put together a couple of paragraphs, which ended up bearing no resemblance whatsoever to what turned into Midnight. But I think it was just to show that there was something that I wasn't suddenly going off on a historical fiction tack, that I was sticking to the psychological thrillers, and I was going to sort of keep on doing that. And I was contracted to write psychological thrillers specifically, so I can't go off the wall too much. I do need to stick to a certain sort of a certain program. What I am in the very lucky position with my editor is that it is a collaborative process in terms of planning. I mean, in terms of editing, I've now got to the point where with both Lies and Midnight, I sent off first drafts simultaneously to editor plus agent without having had anyone read in between, let alone rereading it myself. I mean, in the first instance, it was because of lack of time. And in the second time with Midnight, I actually thought, you know what, there's no point. The only person whose opinion really that's important is my editor, and we need to work together. And, there is a sort of a trust thing there that they're not going to throw you out, because obviously it's crap in so many different ways. But that actually they see, they'll see the good stuff in the midst of all the crap and be able to tease out what it is you're actually trying to do. And so where we are with planning 4 is that I've sort of put through some ideas which were turned down because they didn't think it was really, there was one, and I'm really glad they said no to it. I became obsessed about doing something in the Himalayas, in the Death Zone, because I thought it would be really cool. Amy McCulloch has of course come along with Breathless and done it brilliantly. And what's more, as someone who's actually been a mountaineer, she, because I said, well, I could go to Everest Death Camp, and not Death Camp, Everest Camp. Oh, well, I'm so sorry, that's a terrible one, but Everest base camp. I said I could go to Everest Base Camp, and
it would clearly be a death camp once you'd written the novel.
He looked at me, did the main person at Wildfire, and he said, we don't think you'd come back alive. And I thought, how dare you? And then I looked at myself and I thought, yeah, you may have a point. So they will say no to things, but that also, which is bad and a little bit sort of anxious inducing. But I think that we've all become more confident with each other that, they can say no to something, and I might have a little bit of, oh, fuck, I like that. And then I'm like, okay, what's next? And I just keep kicking ideas around until the thing comes together that feels right. And when they say yes, I'm then writing with confidence that they're not going to turn around and say, actually, this isn't what we want, because we've agreed, and as long as I stick to the brief that I've presented, then, we're all good. I think it would be quite nerve-wracking to go off, write a complete book without having discussed, I'm not established enough for that yet by any stretch of the imagination. We all need to be behind it. So that's really I'm contracted to write psychological thrillers, and I will discuss with them until we get the psychological thriller that we're all happy with. And it is teamwork. That's isn't it? We all, and if you can't trust them, then you shouldn't be working with them, really.
That's so true. Yes. So you had your 2-paragraph idea, and that obviously went off to acquisitions, and you got your deal from that. And then, so with the planning stage, how did you do that with your editor? Did you sort of submit a synopsis or an Excel spreadsheet, or did you go and meet him and have like a real fleshing out meeting?
We did I don't know how to use Excel, so I can't.
No, nor do I.
I don't really understand it, though I see people plan on it very efficiently. What I did was I had a sort of a page and a half. I fleshed out the paragraphs into a page and a half, 2-page synopsis, which was, telling the story beginning to end ish. And then I did character, I sort of introduced to the characters, and I did a bit of, this is going to be this timeline, and this is going to be that timeline. And that was where we were with that. And we didn't actually go too much into detail because he thought, they thought it looked okay and we could work with that. And then I went away and I wrote about 25,000 words. And having written that, I realized that some of the things needed to change because actually, as I said, I got to know the characters much better in that process. So then I did a more detailed, like a list essentially of what was going to happen, like a scene list. And I sent that through as a revised plan plus the 20,000 words. And we sort of chatted about that a bit, and Jack gave a couple of steers, but nothing too major at that point. But again, an indication of happiness and confidence, which meant I felt happy to keep going. And I actually found that with that document, even though I didn't refer back to it that often, I did find that I'd actually was ticking off scenes. It was ingrained enough in my mind by that stage that I was able to use it as a template, and that I was sticking to it as a template. When I got the first editorial notes through, that was because I ended up flipping it. The way it ends is exactly in the reverse of the way it ended at the end of draft 1. And so that was and I think Jack would discuss things with me as much as I wanted to. So, at the moment I'm planning this new one. And I sort of keep sending ideas to him about the ways to do it. And he says, yes, no, this might not, what about this? And then I go away and think about it. And I think if I wanted to have a massive brainstorm with him, I could. I don't know if I do right now because it's still a little bit too tenuous that it might spoil it if I say it too much out loud. But equally, I do know if I want to discuss anything, he will, he's incredibly responsive, and we do have that kind of dialogue going, which is incredibly helpful.
Well, that's great. How has your writing process changed over the years? Because obviously you said, that you wrote Blood Orange during the MA. So what does a sort of typical writing day for you, what does that look like now? Has the way you write changed since you first wrote your debut?
Yes, no. I still procrastinate just as appallingly. I try and do, it used to be that I could write 2,000 words in a day really easily, and that's sadly I can't do that anymore. I now find 1,000 words is a good workable number, but quite honestly, I spend a lot of time not writing, which actually I did think that's just because I'm lazy, but in fact I think it's because I'm thinking. And that because plot solutions, I'll sort of wake up at 4 a.m. with a solution to something, and I've begun to understand that is simply part of my process. I'm not, well, on many levels I'm not Dickens, but that ability just every day, every day, every day, and then every day. I can't do that. I actually need to have, I need to have fallow periods, and then I have periods of quite high activity. And that I'd say the big difference with the MA writing of Blood Orange was that was done in 10,000 word increments. So I'd do a chunk, it would get workshopped. I'd then go back and do major editing before doing the next chunk. Whereas that's not something that you can't work like that, because we don't have time to get the feedback and incorporate the feedback. Now I do just try and push through. I mean, I saw Lisa Jewell talking about her process, where she's really, really good and disciplined about doing 1,000 words a day, and then she has her draft. And I think that if I can do that, if I could do 1,000 words a day, then I will have a complete draft by July of this new book. And I mean, that would be amazing, because then, the raw material's there. And that's, what do you do? I mean, how much do you do? How much do you both do a day? Do you do every day?
No, I'm similar to you, actually, Harriet. I need those sort of fallow periods. I'm having one now. And I actually, I'm not motivated by word count. I've tried to write a certain number of words a day, and that just doesn't work for me. I just have to write what I write, and that could be 200 words, it could be 100 words, or it could be 1,400. It just depends on the day and what happens. And I try not to beat myself up if I don't write a huge amount, because if I've only written a little bit, I might have still managed to resolve something in my mind, and I feel that's work as well, isn't it? Because you've overcome something.
Yeah.
I think you're a little different though, aren't you, Lauren? You're very very.
Yes, I am. I get a bit obsessed with the word count. So I what do I do? So what I've been doing with this one is I have sort of 2 push days in the week, which is about 3,000 words, and then for the rest of the week is 1,000 words. So I try and do it that way, but otherwise it's 1,500, 2,000 words a day. And then, I think like Lisa Jewell, you then have a very dirty, rough first draft that you can then build on and work with. Like, once I've got that, I probably spend another month on it, just then working on it. But I try not to edit too much as I go. Very different, I think. But everyone's different. It's just what works for you.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that is the key point, not editing as you go. That I actually found it was incredibly liberating. I mean, with Midnight, for a period of time, one of the Tess had kids. And then I realized halfway through I just didn't want that complication of I just didn't need that complication, because of course it brings in a whole nother layer of stuff. And so I just stopped writing the kids. They just ceased to exist. But in the first 6-7 chapters there was quite a lot about them, and so when I went through and tried to edit them out, I didn't fully succeed. And so when people were reading that dirty first draft, they're suddenly like, why are the kids not eating turmeric, Harriet, when there are no kids? And I'm like, oh yeah, sorry about that. Okay, I'll get rid of them now. But actually it's really liberating, because you just push through at whatever pace at which you push, and then to tidy later and to clean up those continuity errors is I was always obsessed with fixing them before, but everyone works differently, and I think it has to be whatever you can do without driving yourself. I wish 3,000 is a push day and 1,000 is my God, Laura, I want that. Oh, I want that.
Yes, I want it too.
It is hardcore. Yes. So where does reading slot into your routine, Harriet? What kind of books do you like to read?
Lots, and on and off. I have huge periods of reading, and then I have periods where I don't read at all, because I don't get off my phone, which is just so fucking annoying. It drives me mad, because I just don't need that number of hot takes about Putin. It's not good for anybody. But of course there has been so much news that one can doom scroll. I'm generally a lot healthier mentally if I can get rid of my phone in the evening and then actually read a book. When I'm on holiday, I can read 2-3 books a day, just because that is literally all I do. I'm not saying I read, but I inhale them, and I do actually take on board a lot of it. I like to read a very, very wide range of, of course I'm sent a lot of things in my
area, and I try and read as much of it as I can, though it becomes a little overwhelming. Actually, on the moment, I'm on an official no, which felt very self-important, to ask my editor to say no to things, but it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. And also, I do want to read things which aren't crime, because I think that for me, everything I read informs my work. Whether it's as a negative or as a positive, whether it's an inspiration or, how do they do that? Or, so of course, if I read a well-crafted psych thriller, I will analyze it to see what I can adopt. And then if I read a romance, I'm thinking, well, they've got really likable characters. How do I bring some of that in? This is what it's like to root for a character. But then I like nonfiction just because it's a different, that's what the lovely thing is. Books is books is books. Right now I'm reading a romance called The Fake Up by Justin Myers, who was the guy liner in The Guardian, and I'm really enjoying it. I had a massive reading jag over the Easter weekend where I read Georgina Moore's new book called The Garnet Girls, which is sort of one of those big family saga things, and beaches and lots of that with parties, and that was like that was a bit sort of Rosamund Pilcher. And I do, for all I write this sort of dark, I do love a romance, and I do love the, I suppose you call it women's fiction, which is, it's just really good family drama stuff. And in terms of crime, I'm just that Miss Arledge Regrets, Louise Hare's new book that's just coming out on Thursday. That is a sort of, I'm going to say semi-golden age, but it's got more going on to it than just a sort of locked room. There is locked room. It's set in between the wars. I'm going to get that period of time wrong, but it's a sort of golden age, lovely, set on a cruise ship, but with lots of, subtle analysis of race and class, and a cracking central heroine who drinks and smokes and is a jazz singer and is just fantastic. That's a book I'd recommend very heavily. And I've got this Lessons in Chemistry waiting on.
Oh yes, I have as well.
Yeah, lots of people are talking about
that looks cracking, doesn't it? So I'm really looking forward to, I think I might read that after I've finished The Fake Up. I'm thinking I might read that, because actually it's quite good to sort of have a bit of off time, and away from analysing as well, that you're actually just reading it because you're reading it. But I should read more than I do, and I read a lot anyway because it always makes me feel better. It's good.
Yeah, no, definitely. What about you, Leslie? What have you been reading?
Well, I've got Lessons in Chemistry. I think that's over there behind. Well, it's behind your book, but I'm also my agent sent me this just for a treat, so I hadn't read it yet. I don't know if you've read, but I'm really looking for. I've read the first few chapters this morning, and I'm already into that. And I've been sent a Tim Weaver, Blackbird. It's very fancy proof.
Oh my God, that's
personalised proof. Do you know much about blackbirds, Leslie? And I have to say I don't, but I probably will when I've read this. So.
That looks very cool.
And I'm reading another book by Eva Björg Eystottir. As you can hear, I'm fluent in Icelandic, and that's called Night Shadows. And what about you, Lauren? What are you reading?
Well, I have just finished reading Breathless by Amy McCulloch, which we just talked about, and I just absolutely loved it. I think it's probably one of my favourite books of the year so far, and I don't know if you can read that. And for the viewers, this is the first signed copy here that Amy's ever signed.
Wow!
Which, because I met her at Whitley Bay, and it was the day before publication, so I got a sneaky first book from her.
Amazing.
And then the other book, I was listening to The Nothing Man by Catherine Ryan Howard, which was amazing. I love her writing so much. I loved was it 52 days? She had the lockdown thrillers. 56 days, sorry, 56, I love that. And The Nothing Man, again, I loved it. I'm a big fan of her writing now. So they were my books.
Great. Well, we're almost at the end, but we've got a final fun question to ask, which is, it's about the funniest New Year's Eve, because your book is set, obviously New Year's Eve, and we're wondering what was the sort of funniest or strangest New Year's Eve story that you might have that you can share with us?
Well, I don't know if funny is quite the word. Like everything, I try and be funny, and it's actually really quite bleak. But I'm afraid it all kind of involves drinking too much and puking.
New Year's Eve.
But it's a toss up between the night I drank 2/3 of a bottle of Bailey and then had to wake up covered in the vomit of Bailey in the morning, and I cannot. So that was when I was 19, I think, and I'm 50 this year, and the smell of Bailey still just makes me want to puke. I can never drink that again. And kids, I don't recommend it. It's a really bad thing. That was terrible. And then the other one, and I don't know if this is, it's sort of funny, sad. It was, blacking out on Jameson's to the extent that, I could barely stand, and I didn't even realize that the fireworks were going off at midnight, and someone said, "Oh, they were great fireworks," and I'm like, "Did we see the fireworks?" Yes, Harriet. So I don't think those are very funny. I think that they're kind of more like, yeah, dear God, don't. That's terrible.
Classic New Year's.
Classic. It is a sort of classic young. It's a classic young person's New Year of just foolishly drinking too much, and there's all of the excitement in the air. But yeah, they're a much more staid affair now.
What about you, Lauren? Have you got any tales of daring do to tell us on
Well, I don't think this is going to come as a massive shock to anyone, but I actually don't generally like New Year's, and I never have, even pre-kids. I was never one to stay up late, so a lot of my New Year's Eve just passed me by, and I still like to go to bed on time. But there was one night, and I was in my early 20s before I met my husband. I was working in London, but I'd moved back home to Essex while I was in between rentals, and so I thought, I'll take a shift in the local pub, just because that's where I used to work, and nobody likes to work New Year's, and I don't mind doing it. So I did, but it was really quiet. And at 9:30, I was like, well, there's no one here, no one's coming in. So I just left and hopped on a train to London and got there for 11 and met this boy I was vaguely seeing, and who opened the door with a black sambuca for me in my hand. And I think because it was quite a night I wasn't expecting, it was quite good fun, and we all ended up swapping clothes, which was really random. I was in boys' jeans. It was quite a nice fun night, really. But for the most part, it's not very funny. I'm very much a in bed by 9:30 person for New Year's. What about you, Leslie?
Well, in my heyday, many years ago, the normal tales of sort of snogging inappropriate strangers in pubs and getting blind drunk, really. I do remember, Millennium Eve, we were sort of staying with some friends who had a lovely apartment at Butler's Wharf, and so we had a fantastic view of their fireworks. But I couldn't get too drunk that night because obviously I had my young children with me. But so there have been various sort of drunken, embarrassing moments in the past. These days I'm kind of, I'm like you, Lauren. These days I'm not a great lover of New Year's Eve. I sometimes find it a struggle actually to stay up till midnight. And if we're ever invited to a New Year's Eve party, I say to Rashid, oh, so-and-so's invited us to a New Year's Eve party, and we both sort of go,
Well, that was this year we were meant to have. We had actually planned people to come to dinner. Everyone got COVID. In the end, we had this load of food because, I'd got sort of one of those restaurant meals kind of thing. It was just going to heat it up. And so I had this massive amount of food, and just me and my husband. So, it was lovely because we just sat and watched telly and went to bed. And my teenage son was having a party, which was slightly, so I was also staying very sober because I might have to drive back and deal with a crisis.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? When you've got kids.
It does change it. It does, when they're out and about, you do start to be a bit more like, I need to be responsible now. So, I think that raucous New Year is 100% a thing of the past. And hallelujah, I think that's brilliant.
Yes. There's a time, isn't there? Yeah. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for today. Harriet, thank you so much. You've been such a wonderful guest. It's been wonderful hearing all your answers to our questions and being so fabulous. So It Ends at Midnight is out now, so do grab a copy as it is thrilling.
Yes, thank you so much, Harriet. We've really loved talking to you. It's been a really in-depth conversation and it's
Yes, it
discussion.
has.
It's been fabulous. You've been great. And on our next episode, we are chatting to Aimé Allanger about his debut novel, A Good Day to Die. And we're not sure what the topic's going to be yet, but we
haven't decided.
We haven't decided that, but we will decide in time, let me assure you. But for now, we're going to say goodbye from Harriet.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Goodbye from Lauren.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. Bye.
Bye.